After two rather unsuccessful entries in the Gun Survivor sub-series, you would figure Capcom would be ready to throw in the towel, but there is three things you can count on in this world: death, taxes, and Capcom making incredibly odd business decisions. With another chance at finally combining the worlds of first-person shooters and atmospheric survival horror, our favorite game development punching bag would actually show that they were capable of learning from past mistakes and capitalizing on a few things they got right in the first place. Could this goal ever really be achieved? Would this game be the one to do it? And most importantly, have I found a way to play this game that dramatically changes my original opinion of it? Well, I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. Dead Aim is the fourth entry in the Gun Survivor branch of Resident Evil's family tree, but I wouldn't blame you if you never knew that. Rebranded as Resident Evil Dead Aim in the States, Capcom decided to ditch the Survivor subtitle as it was only associated with one game so far over here, and that wasn't exactly a game they wanted people remembering. And let's be fair, Resident Evil Dead Aim was a lot easier to digest than Gun Survivor 4 Biohazard Heroes Never Die, although in hindsight, that's a pretty cool name. And now is probably a good time to mention that this is my second attempt at reviewing this game. About 3 years ago I made a video on Dead Aim, but without giving anything away, there's a lot I got wrong. Check the link in the corner if you want my initial impressions of the game, but be warned, this was made back when I recorded my gameplay footage through, analog video. Anyways, getting back to the actual subject at hand, thanks to an agreement with Nintendo, Capcom was unable to release any mainline RE games, so building on the Gun Survivor brand was almost a necessity at this point. Capcom needed an RE game on the market, but they needed even more to make sure that they didn't have another poorly reviewed light gun shooter under their belt. And that's about all I could dig up. The development process seemed to go pretty smoothly as the game was released just about on schedule, so I gotta apologize to any of you who are expecting the typical Resident Evil shit show, as far as development goes at least. Dead Aim puts us in the shoes of Bruce McGivern, a member of the US Strategic Command, and a guy who's about as corny as you would expect a guy named Bruce McGivern to be.
Sorry, but my dance card is full.
Bruce is sent aboard the Umbrella-owned Spencer Rain to stop Morpheus, an ex-Umbrella employee who's threatening both the US and China with missiles filled with the T-virus. Of course, everybody on the Spencer Rain has been infected with said virus because why the hell wouldn't they be? In between capping the dead, collecting key items, and rummaging through people's personal diaries, we find out we're not the only agent in play here. Fong Ling is a member of China's intelligence agency and is essentially on the same mission as Bruce, but don't think that'll stop her from working against both their desired goals just to screw over Bruce a few times. While Resident Evil games don't exactly live and die on their well-told stories, a good tale goes a long way in helping suspend a little disbelief, and I have to say Dead Aim just barely breaks even in this regard. It's clear whoever wrote this was just going down an RE trope checklist, a method known as the modern Silent Hill approach in story writing. The only problem is this person didn't seem to know much about the series other than surface level stuff. Self-destruct finales, the last boss who injects themselves with a mutagenic substance, and of course that same boss turning into a pile of liquid flesh. You know, boilerplate stuff. But sadly, this carbon copy lacks the reasonable premise and likable characters recent games had up to this point. And the absolute worst part of it is there are some glaring series inaccuracies here. For example, despite this game taking place 4 years after the G-virus outbreak in Raccoon City, Morpheus would choose to steal the T-virus because why? And for some reason this game wants you to believe Morpheus was the one responsible for causing that original outbreak. I mean, sure, why not retcon William Birkin out of doing the thing we all saw him do in RE2? Look, the point is, Dead Aim has just enough of a story to keep its head above water, pun intended. It would probably hold the title of worst original RE story in history had we not have already covered Survivor in the retrospective. Fans of RE lore approach with extreme caution. In my very first review of Dead Aim, I complained at how terrible the controls can be when using an actual PS2 pad, and commenters were quick to remind me that this is a light gun shooter and I wasn't judging it using the tools it was meant to be experienced with. Well, both of these things are still true. Using a PS2 controller with this game still blows ass, and my use of a FrameMeister for upscaling and an LCD TV means I can't use light guns, but I found a completely different control method that makes for an improvement on a life-altering scale. Before we get into that, however, we gotta cover the basics. Dead Aim is a game of twos. It's meant to be controlled with both the PS2 controller and GunCon 2, and it sports both third and first-person views. The general idea is you can run around the environment collecting items, dodging zombies, and unlocking doors with a relatively familiar FOV. But hitting R1 will ready your weapon and put you in a first-person view. From here you can hold L1 or 2 in any direction to move your body independently from your aiming reticle. If you have a GunCon, you can just aim and shoot in this mode, but with a controller you have to count on the right analog stick to adjust your aim, and anyone familiar with the huge dead zones these sticks can have can imagine how frustrating this can be. Small precise adjustments are almost impossible, so you'll probably count on moving your body as opposed to the reticle, an approach that has downsides of its own. Both from my last playthrough and this most recent one, I came across the same exact problems. An inability to correct for swaying zombies in up-close fights thanks to how sensitive the right analog stick can be, and a last boss encounter that brought me to the absolute peak of human anger. As a teen, I can remember beating this boss in my first or second attempt, but in getting this footage, I died and had to redo the long sequence that led up to him a whopping 22 times. Completely engulfed in anger, I was prepared to nail this game to a wall using this review as some kind of verbal middle finger to the dev team. And then when I was about to do something totally non-violent and completely mature, there it was, staring me right in the face. Yeah, your eyes aren't tricking you right now. You can use any ordinary USB mouse to control this game on the PS2. I was completely blown away, and the craziest thing is, it made the game I was close to setting on fire in frustration orders of magnitude more fun. At this point, I was welcoming every shambling corpse with arms wide open. I actively went out of my way to kill every enemy I came across because it was fun as hell. Pulling my gun out and getting accurate headshots with every click brought a smile to my face you wouldn't believe. So yeah, let's call this me accepting that you guys were right. I definitely should not have been using the PS2 controller. Well, I guess we should probably go over how this works. Literally any USB mouse will do the trick, and at first you might not think it's working since you can't navigate the start screen with it and there's no option to enable mouse support. But just plug that bad boy in, start the game, and you're good to go. The left click readies your gun, fires it, and doubles as a confirm button in the inventory, and the right click acts as cancel. You're still gonna have to use your controller, but the devs kept this in mind. L1 and L2 play double duty as your interact buttons and allow you to move freely in first person. Yeah, sure, playing like this can be a little weird at first, but when you compare the results, there is absolutely no reason to go back to the controller. After playing the game with a mouse, I found out that headshots didn't just randomly kill like I thought they did. It turns out there's a sweet spot just above the forehead, which I would never have found out about had I have kept using a controller. Okay, so I might be harping on this a little bit too much. The point is, I wish someone would have told me about this earlier, so I'm telling you now. No one with a computer in the house should ever play this game with a controller again. And with that huge rant out of the way, how does this game stack up next to the other two Gun Survivor games? And yes, I did say two. Dino Stalker sadly doesn't count because it's technically a Dino Crisis game, but we will get to that at some point. Well, I'd say Dead Aim takes the good aspects of both games and combines them together. If you watched my review of RE Survivor, you'll remember I applauded it for incorporating so much traditional RE gameplay, but the first-person shooting was pretty crappy, and I liked how Gun Survivor 2 improved the shooting, but didn't like that it dropped all the RE stuff. Well, Dead Aim is the perfect combination of the two. This feels the most like an actual Resident Evil game out of the whole sub-series. There's spooky environments to explore, backtracking to be done, and ammo to be conserved. Sure, pistol rounds are essentially unlimited due to giant caches being in every save room, but you only have 6 slots to keep it in, so you'll be forced to decide between carrying a lot of bullets for your sidearm or spreading it evenly between your more powerful weapons. Every part of the game kind of feels like it's been done in the spirit of survival horror, and that earns it high marks in my eyes. Taking the shooting out of the equation, navigation can be a bit hard to get used to at first, especially with a single hand on the controller, but a combination of good environment design and solid controls makes zombie dodging as rewarding as it's ever been. Sure, there's still some crap besides the poor shooting with the controller, but that's mostly limited to bosses' hurt boxes somehow being bigger than the actual animation of their attacks. With a 3 to 4 hour runtime, things can feel a bit condensed, but I think this game lasts about as long as it needs to. Overall, I gotta say, this is the closest a gun survivor game has come to actually nailing the Resident Evil formula. That combined with the fun that comes with playing a console first-person shooter with a combination of mouse and controller makes for a complete blast for both my survival horror and action shooter sides. Consider this an absolute recommendation to the RE fan that's looking to branch out but still wants that familiar feel. Just make sure you have a mouse handy. I'd say Dead Aim's presentation is one of the most interesting aspects of the entire package. There's a lot going on here, just not all of it's good. The game runs on a modified version of id Tech 3, aka the Quake 3 engine, and even though it's clear the game received the most attention and largest budget out of the gun survivor games, it's also clear that either the engine or the dev team had some serious limitations. But before we tear it down, let's give the devil his due. As far as environment design goes, this game looks amazing for its time. The Spencer Rain looks equal parts modern cruise ship and recent location of a viral outbreak. There's just something about the way this ship was designed that felt real and immersive, which is a real achievement when you take into account the level of competition it has in the form of other RE games. A strong emphasis on lighting is also a big selling point here. Most of the game takes place in really dark locations, and Bruce's flashlight only illuminates a very small area around him. As you might expect, that really brings the creep factor up a couple notches. Hearing a zombie moan and shuffle around down a dark hallway when you can't see more than 3 or 4 feet in front of your own nose is terrifying, and probably one of the strongest aspects of the game's presentation. Of course, this effect isn't perfect, and you can actually see the limitations of the engine in this regard. A quick look at the ceiling and walls shows this to be classic per vertex lighting instead of per pixel, so the areas that are affected by light sources are few in number and large in size. Not exactly a big deal, but it's kind of fun to take note of these kinds of cool tricks to get around the PS2's relatively underperforming hardware. There's also a good amount of bloom lighting to be found, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't really remember seeing a lot of this on the console at the time, minus Midway's The Suffering games. Now, you know I have to weigh in on the zombie models in each of these videos, and with Dead Aim, I have to give major credit for some believable shambling corpses. When they get up close to you, it's easy to see the shortcuts taken in texture work, but as most of the game is spent shooting these guys from a distance with limited visibility, the effectiveness of these shortcuts are undeniable. When you hear one of these deadheads moan, you can actually see their mouths open, and convincing models coupled with even more convincing animations makes for some pretty creepy vibes. And since we're on the subject, these animations are fucking top notch. The stumble of the zombies was obviously included to make headshots less easy to get, but it also doubles as some great eye candy. The way their dead bodies interact with the environment, however, deserves special mention. Blowing a zombie away, watching it ragdoll into the environment, and seeing it slide limply down a wall, leaving a long blood smear in its wake, is probably one of the most visually satisfying things achieved in the series since RE1's shotgun decapitations. There are several variations on this idea, accounting for different angles and backdrops, which is exactly the kind of cool attention to detail that I love seeing in games. If I had to nitpick, I'd say that the red glow they get to indicate they've spotted you does work against their believable look and feel, but this wasn't ever enough to take me out of the experience. Speaking of small things no one cares about, there's something weird going on under the hood here that I can't really make heads or tails of. I noticed that in some instances, the game's graphics would appear way more aliased than usual. You can see it here with some angles showing a smooth character model and others showing some serious stair-stepping. These situations always happen during moments of slowdown or when a lot of 3D assets were in view, so it's clear this was a dynamic measure taken to relieve some of the stress on the hardware, which leads me to 2 possible explanations. Either what we're looking at is a dynamically changing internal rendering resolution, or the stripping of some kind of anti-aliasing filter. Now, the PS2 wasn't exactly known for being able to implement anti-aliasing, but at the same time, it rarely changed internal render resolutions without affecting overall output either. So something odd is definitely going on here, but regardless of why, this was a really cool curiosity, and if you have any info on the matter, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Okay, so we've praised enough, let's get down to the less than stellar parts of the game's presentation. While I praise Dead Aim's zombie models and animations, your main characters look absolutely awful in comparison. I mean, look at this face. Does this look like the work of someone who understands human anatomy? Now, I typically wouldn't harp too much about bad graphics or design elements like this, but when the rest of the game is so impressive, I just can't wrap my head around how someone approved this neck for the final product. On the same note, animations for your characters seem really simple and run-of-the-mill. Just like Gun Survivor on the PS1, Dead Aim opts for using compressed videos of in-game graphics for some cutscenes, and trust me, the jump to 480i doesn't do as much for this approach as you would think. And speaking of these cutscenes, I ran into issues with my FrameMeister losing sync during the transitions from gameplay to these pre-baked cinematics. It really only happened a handful of times, but once it kicked in after transitioning into a boss fight, which ended in me getting killed. And finally, aside from the zombies, this game has some of the worst monster design in series history. I know this is very subjective, but these things just look flat out dumb. And since there are obviously no ports of this game, we can skip to my overall thoughts on its graphics, which are actually really positive despite my gripes. The dark atmospheric feel of its world and really great looking zombies makes this feel like the most visually authentic entry in the Gun Survivor series. It really does feel like a small slice of what a next-gen RE game could have been, and I get a kick out of the possibility it represented. The lack of any music other than ambient noise in most parts of the game, while not a visual element, mixed with the game's graphics to make an honest-to-goodness atmospheric horror game. As for its interlaced-only output, I have to say this is one of those rare PS2 games whose 480i plays to the strengths of the FrameMeister. Upscaling this bad boy looks incredible to my eyes, and with some solid component cables, the PS2's noisy video output is limited to only being noticeable on the map screen. Of course, you are likely to see some combing artifacts from the FrameMeister's deinterlacing, but that's to be expected. So yeah, despite some noticeable flaws, this is a really good looking game, at least if you're judging it in a Resident Evil context. And if you are, I think you'll find a game that got surprisingly close to feeling like a legit entry in the main series. But the million-dollar question is, should you bother with a light gun shooter when you've got that survival horror itch? And I say yes, absolutely. Back when I first covered this game, I was completely turned off by the bad experience I had with the controller, but now that I've gotten rid of that roadblock, I can see the game for what it is, and more importantly, what it wanted to be. This was a clear shot at fusing the two worlds of survival horror RE and first-person action RE, and with a dead-even 50-50 split, I think the devs deserve credit for getting so close to that Resident Evil feeling. At a little under $20, Dead Aim is 100% worth a shot, especially for you hardcore fans. Just make sure you plug in a USB mouse or a gun con. Under the right circumstances, I think this game can really surprise you, and come on, you know damn well you want to know firsthand how crazy it feels playing a PS2 game with a mouse. Well guys, that about does it for me, but make sure to stick around for the mystery because I legitimately don't know which game I want to tackle next. So until I figure that out, I hope I see all of you again right here on the Resident Evil Retrospective. What's up guys, thanks for sticking around. If you want to dive deeper into the Gun Survivor series, click on the playlist here. And if you want to support flat out ridiculous videos like this one, check out my Patreon page where you can get videos early and take part in the creative and decision-making process that goes into producing these extended rants masquerading as game reviews.